It's a strange thing, this Graceland. A sprawling mansion, a king's castle in the middle of a working class neighborhood. For decades, it's pulled people from all over the world to Memphis to Whitehaven. And what happens when you have millions of tourists pouring into one spot? But the streets around it, the homes nearby, they've seen better days. How do you reconcile that? How do you make sure the magic of Elvis doesn't just stay behind those iconic gates, but spills out, helps the people who actually live there? It's a tough question, and not just for Memphis. Think about it, a global landmark, a place that defines a city, sitting in a community that faces its own struggles. What does that mean for housing, for jobs, for traffic, for the very soul of a place? This isn't just about making things look pretty. It's about real lives, real families, and the future of a whole chunk of Memphis. Urban planners, researchers, community leaders, they've all spent a lot of time looking at this. They've crunched numbers, talked to people, drawn maps. They've done nearly 20 major studies just trying to figure out how to make the area around Graceland work, not just for the tourists, but for the folks who call Whitehaven home. And after all that work, after all that looking, what have they really learned? And what do we still not know? Number 19, can a tourist magnet also be a local home? One of the first big studies to really dig into this was the Whitehaven Revitalization Blueprint, published in 2017 by the Memphis Shelby County Office of Planning and Development in partnership with the University of Memphis's Department of City and Regional Planning. This wasn't just about Graceland itself. It was a broad look at the entire Whitehaven community, trying to understand its strengths and weaknesses beyond the tourist attraction. The lead researcher was Dr. Aaliyah Jones, a professor specializing in community development. The study started with a lot of community meetings, listening sessions, trying to get a feel for what residents actually wanted. What came out was a strong desire for better local amenities, things like grocery stores, parks, and safe places for kids to play. There was a clear sense that while Graceland brought visitors, it didn't always bring direct benefits to the everyday lives of Whitehaven residents. The report pointed out that many local businesses struggled to attract tourist dollars, largely because visitors often arrived by tour bus, went straight into Graceland, and then left without really exploring the neighborhood. One key finding was about the spatial disconnect. Elvis Presley Boulevard, the main artery, was designed more for cars than people. It created a barrier, not a bridge, between Graceland and the surrounding residential areas. The study suggested improvements to pedestrian infrastructure like wider sidewalks and better crosswalks to encourage visitors to walk further into Whitehaven. It also highlighted the need for more diverse local businesses that could serve both residents and tourists, moving beyond just Elvis-themed souvenir shops. As Dr. Jones noted in her summary, that proximity to a global icon does not automatically translate into local prosperity. Intentional planning is required to bridge that gap. This blueprint became a foundational document informing many subsequent discussions. It showed a clear desire for Graceland to be more integrated, not just an island. But what about the residents who felt pushed aside by the constant stream of tour buses? And if we make it easier for tourists to walk around, will that just lead to more gentrification, making Whitehaven too expensive for the people who've always lived there? And can a local economy truly thrive next to such a massive, singular attraction without becoming completely overshadowed by it? Number 18, are visitors actually exploring beyond the gates? And then came Graceland's Gravity Tourist Flow Analysis, a detailed report from 2019 put out by the Memphis Convention and Visitors Bureau with technical assistance from the national consulting firm Urbane Analytics. This study was all about tracking where tourists went, how they moved, and if they spent money outside Graceland's immediate footprint. They used anonymous cell phone data, surveys, and even some old-fashioned observation to map out visitor patterns. The findings were pretty stark. A huge majority of visitors, something like 80%, arrived at Graceland, spent their time within the complex of the mansion, the exhibits, the shops, the restaurants, and then left. They didn't venture much into the surrounding Whitehaven neighborhood. The study found that the average tourist spent less than 30 minutes outside the Graceland property, excluding travel time to and from the site. This meant that local businesses, especially those not directly affiliated with Graceland, were missing out on a massive economic opportunity. The report identified a pull factor where Graceland acted like a black hole, sucking in all the visitor attention and dollars with very little spillover into the adjacent commercial districts or residential areas. This confirmed what the earlier Whitehaven Revitalization Blueprint had suggested: there was a disconnect. The study recommended strategies to incentivize tourists to explore, such as creating curated walking tours of Whitehaven's historic areas, or offering discounts at local non-Graceland businesses for visitors who presented a Graceland ticket. A key takeaway from the lead analyst, Mr. David Chen, was that without deliberate intervention, the economic benefits of Graceland remain largely encapsulated within its own boundaries. But if tourists are actively being encouraged to walk around, does that mean less privacy for the people who live in Whitehaven? And how do you create curated experiences without turning authentic neighborhood life into another theme park attraction? And what if the local businesses simply aren't equipped or interested in catering to a global tourist market? Number 17, does redevelopment help or harm local residents? The question of who benefits from all this talk of redevelopment got a hard look in Equity in Elmore Park, a social impact assessment from 2020. This was a critical piece of work spearheaded by the Memphis Center for Social Justice and led by Dr. Evelyn Reed, a sociologist with a focus on urban equity. And Elmore Park is a residential area right next to Graceland, and its residents were often at the forefront of these discussions. The study aimed to understand the potential displacement risks and social costs of redevelopment plans. It conducted extensive interviews with longtime residents, many of whom expressed anxiety about rising property values and increased traffic. They worried that any improvements meant for tourists would ultimately price them out of their homes or change the character of their neighborhood in ways they didn't want. The report found a significant fear of Graceland creep, where the commercialization of the area would slowly erode the residential fabric. Dr. Reed's team used a methodology that quantified the potential for indirect displacement, not just direct eviction, but the pressure of property tax increases, rising rents, and the changing social dynamics that make a neighborhood feel less like home. The study highlighted the importance of anti-displacement strategies like community land trusts, affordable housing mandates for new developments, and property tax relief programs for low-income, long-term residents. It pointed out that without these measures, any revitalization could easily become gentrification, pushing out the very people the plans were supposed to help. True revitalization, Dr. Reed wrote, must center the needs of existing residents, not just potential newcomers or visitors. But even with anti-displacement strategies, is it truly possible to prevent the economic forces that come with development? And if we freeze things to protect existing residents, does that prevent necessary improvements and investments? And who ultimately decides what character of the neighborhood means when different groups have different visions? Number 16, can we make Elvis Presley Boulevard more than just a road? The main artery through Whitehaven, Elvis Presley Boulevard, was the focus of the Elvis Presley Boulevard Corridor Study, commissioned by the Memphis City Council in 2016 and executed by the urban design firm Placemakers Collective. This study wasn't about the mansion itself, but the street leading up to it. It analyzed traffic flow, pedestrian safety, aesthetics, and public transit along the entire stretch. The report's findings were clear. The boulevard was a high-speed, car-centric thoroughfare. It had wide lanes, minimal street furniture, poor lighting in some areas, and inadequate pedestrian crossings. This made walking along the boulevard an unpleasant, even dangerous experience for both residents and tourists. It also meant that the street didn't act as a main street for Whitehaven, it was just a way to get through it. The study presented a vision for a complete street, one that accommodates all users, not just cars. This included narrower lanes to slow traffic, dedicated bike lanes, wider and tree-lined sidewalks, better lighting, and more frequent, signalized pedestrian crossings. Architect Sarah Thompson, who led the design team, emphasized that a boulevard should be an experience, not just a conveyance. The study included renderings of what the street could look like, showing bustling sidewalks, small cafes, and public art. It also proposed improvements to bus stops and suggested dedicated public transportation lanes to make it easier for both residents and tourists to move around without a car. This was a concrete plan for physical changes aiming to transform a functional road into a vibrant public space that could serve as a backbone for Whitehaven. But redesigning a major arterial road costs a lot of money and causes significant disruption during construction. And if you slow down traffic too much, will that frustrate commuters who just need to get through Whitehaven? And how do you ensure that any new businesses that emerge on a revitalized boulevard are locally owned, not just national chains? Number 15, where will people live when things change? Housing, especially affordable housing, is always a huge concern in any redevelopment talk. Housing the Future Affordable Options Near Graceland, a comprehensive report from 2021 by the Memphis Housing Authority in collaboration with the local nonprofit Community Development Partners, tackled this head-on. The study looked at existing housing stock, vacancy rates, rental costs, and homeownership trends in the Whitehaven area. The research showed a significant challenge. While Whitehaven historically offered relatively affordable housing compared to other parts of Memphis, property values had begun to tick up, especially closer to the Graceland complex. There was concern that new developments catering to potential workers in a redeveloped tourist district or higher income residents would exacerbate this trend. The study found a scarcity of quality, affordable rental units, and a lack of diverse housing types, mostly single-family homes, with limited options for seniors or younger professionals. Ms. Maria Sanchez, director of the Memphis Housing Authority, highlighted the need for a multi-pronged approach. The report recommended creating inclusionary zoning policies that would require a certain percentage of new developments to be affordable. It also advocated for programs to help existing homeowners with repairs and maintenance, preventing their homes from falling into disrepair and becoming targets for speculative buying. And it suggested exploring community land trusts as a way to permanently preserve affordability, separating the cost of the land from the cost of the home. "We need to plan for housing," Sanchez stated, "that supports the people who built this community, not just those who might come after." But what exactly counts as affordable in an area seeing new investment? And if developers are forced to include affordable units, will that deter them from building anything at all? And what happens to the families who have lived in Whitehaven for generations but don't own their homes and face rising rents? Number 14, how do we keep the money local? The economic impact of Graceland is massive, but Beyond the Wall's Economic Spillovers and Local Business, published in 2018 by the Memphis Office of Economic Development with insights from the Greater Memphis Chamber, asked a pointed question: how much of that money actually stays in Whitehaven? This study specifically focused on local, small businesses in the area immediately surrounding Graceland. The findings were a bit grim. Many small businesses, especially those not directly selling Elvis memorabilia, reported little to no increase in sales from Graceland tourists. The Graceland's Gravity study from Chapter 18 had already hinted at this, but this report delved deeper into the why. It found that tourists often had pre-booked itineraries, ate at Graceland's on-site restaurants, and did their shopping within the complex. Local businesses often lacked the marketing budget, the language capabilities, or the specific products that would appeal to an international tourist demographic. Dr. Kevin Lee, an economist involved in the study, pointed out that the challenge isn't just getting tourists out of Graceland, it's making sure they have compelling reasons and accessible opportunities to spend money locally. The report recommended several strategies, creating a local business incubator program to help Whitehaven entrepreneurs develop tourist-friendly products and services, organizing regular shop local campaigns targeting Graceland visitors, and improving signage and wayfinding to guide tourists to nearby businesses. It also pushed for procurement policies that would encourage Graceland Holdings to purchase goods and services from Whitehaven-based suppliers whenever possible. But how do you define local business in a way that truly benefits the community, not just a new chain setting up shop? And if a local business owner doesn't want to cater to tourists, should they be pressured to? And is it fair to expect a major tourist attraction like Graceland to dictate its purchasing habits to support specific local suppliers, especially if it impacts their own bottom line? Number 13, should we save everything or build anew? Because Whitehaven has a history with many older buildings, some charming, some dilapidated. Historic Preservation versus Modernization in Whitehaven, a 2022 policy paper by the Memphis Landmarks Commission and the Whitehaven Community Development Corporation, explored this tension. The study aims to identify architecturally significant structures and assess the community's desire to preserve them against the push for new development. The research found a complicated picture. While many residents cherished older homes and storefronts for their historical value and neighborhood character, there was also a strong desire for modern amenities and new commercial spaces. The report highlighted that preservation efforts often came with significant costs, and many existing historic buildings were not up to modern codes, making them expensive to renovate. It also noted that some historic buildings were simply old and deteriorating, not necessarily possessing unique architectural merit. Ms. Eleanor Vance, a historian and lead author, stressed that preservation isn't just about saving old bricks, it's about retaining community memory and character while allowing for necessary evolution. The study recommended a tiered approach to preservation. This included identifying truly significant landmarks for strict protection, offering incentives for adaptive reuse of other historic structures, and allowing for sensitive demolition and new construction in areas where existing buildings lacked historical value or were too costly to save. It also emphasized the importance of design guidelines for new construction, ensuring that it harmonized with the existing urban fabric rather than clashing with it. The goal was a balance, not an either-or. But who gets to decide what is architecturally significant and what is just old and deteriorating? And if developers are encouraged to preserve, will that stifle innovation and the creation of truly modern spaces? And what happens when a historic building is privately owned and the owner has no interest or funds for preservation? Number 12, can Graceland be green? Environmental concerns, especially with climate change, are always part of urban planning now. Greening Graceland Sustainable Urban Design, a forward-looking study from 2023 by the Memphis Office of Sustainability, in partnership with the University of Tennessee's School of Landscape Architecture, explored how the area around Graceland could become more environmentally friendly. It looked at everything from stormwater management to urban heat island effects. The findings pointed to several opportunities for improvement. The area had a lot of impervious surfaces, asphalt parking lots, wide roads which contributed to stormwater runoff issues and made the area hotter in summer. There was also a lack of green spaces, trees, and permeable surfaces. The study proposed incorporating more green infrastructure such as rain gardens, permeable paving, and street trees to mitigate these problems. It also looked at energy efficiency for new and renovated buildings and waste management practices for the tourist complex itself. Dr. Kenneth Patel, an environmental planner, highlighted that sustainability isn't just an add-on, it needs to be integrated into every aspect of urban development. The report showcased examples of urban parks that could be created on underutilized land, transforming barren lots into community assets that provided shade, absorbed rainwater, and offered recreational opportunities. It also suggested that Graceland could lead by example, investing in renewable energy or implementing comprehensive recycling programs that go beyond basic requirements. The vision was a Whitehaven that was not just economically vibrant but also ecologically resilient. But where will the space come from for new parks and green infrastructure in an already built-up area? And are residents willing to prioritize environmental benefits over other pressing needs, like better roads or job creation? And will tourists even notice or care if the area is green, or are they just there for Elvis? Number 11, do people feel safe around the king? Perceptions of public safety deeply affect how people view a neighborhood and whether they want to live, visit, or invest there. Public safety perceptions. A community survey from 2017 conducted by the Memphis Police Department in collaboration with a local community advocacy group, Whitehaven United, directly addressed these concerns. The study surveyed hundreds of residents and a smaller sample of tourists about their feelings of safety. The survey revealed a significant gap between actual crime statistics and public perception. While official crime rates in the immediate Graceland area weren't exceptionally high compared to other parts of the city, many residents reported feeling unsafe, especially after dark. They cited issues like loitering, nuisance crimes, and inadequate street lighting. Tourists, generally confined to the Graceland campus, reported feeling mostly safe, but some expressed hesitancy about venturing beyond the gates. Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez, who oversaw the police department's involvement, emphasized that perceptions are reality when it comes to feeling safe in your own neighborhood. The report recommended a multifaceted approach, increased police visibility through foot and bicycle patrols, particularly in commercial areas and transit hubs, community-led initiatives like neighborhood watch programs, and significant investment in improved street lighting and security cameras in public spaces. It also stressed the importance of communication, making sure residents were aware of police efforts and crime prevention resources. The idea was to build trust and address both actual crime and the underlying anxieties. But if increased police presence is the answer, will that lead to over-policing or disproportionately affect certain segments of the community? And how do you balance the need for public safety with privacy concerns related to surveillance cameras? And what role do residents themselves play in actively creating a safer community beyond just reporting crime? Number 10 is Graceland becoming a short-term rental hub. The rise of platforms like Airbnb has changed urban landscapes everywhere, and Whitehaven is no exception. Here, the Heartbreak Hotel effect short-term rentals impact. A 2021 study by the Memphis City Council's Housing and Community Development Committee specifically investigated the proliferation of short-term rental STR properties around Graceland and their effects on the local housing market. The research found a clear trend: an increasing number of homes within a mile or two of Graceland were being converted from traditional long-term rentals or owner-occupied residences into short-term vacation rentals. This was driven by the strong tourist demand and the potential for higher income for property owners. However, the study also identified negative consequences. The influx of STRs was reducing the supply of available long-term rental housing, contributing to rising rents for local residents. It also changed the character of some residential streets, bringing in a constant turnover of visitors rather than stable neighbors. Mr. Thomas Green, a city planner involved in the study, noted that while individual property owners might see short-term rentals as a benefit, too many can hollow out a community. The report recommended implementing stricter regulations on STRs, including requiring permits, limiting the number of non-owner-occupied STRs in residential zones, and imposing occupancy taxes that could be reinvested into affordable housing initiatives. It also suggested a registry for all STRs to better monitor their impact. The goal was to find a balance where property owners could still benefit, but not at the expense of the community's housing stability and residential character. But if homeowners can make more money from short-term rentals, shouldn't they be allowed to? And how do you enforce regulations on an industry that operates largely online across many different platforms? And if we limit STRs, will that just send tourists to hotels further away, taking their money with them? Number 9, what does Graceland mean to the world? Beyond the local impact, Graceland is a global icon. Cultural heritage and branding a global perspective, a 2020 ethnographic and economic study by the International Council on Monuments and Sites (ICOMOS) with the University of Memphis's Institute for International Studies examined Graceland's identity on a world stage. This wasn't just about tourism, it was about Memphis's brand, Elvis's legacy, and how the surrounding area contributes to or detracts from that. The study involved interviews with international tour operators, cultural heritage experts, and visitors from various countries. It found that Graceland's brand was incredibly strong globally, but that the immediate surroundings often didn't meet the expectations of international visitors, especially those used to well-developed heritage sites in Europe or Asia. Many perceived a disconnect between the polished Graceland experience and the less manicured look of Whitehaven. This wasn't about judgment, but about expectations built by other world-class attractions. Dr. Anya Sharma, a cultural anthropologist, pointed out that a global brand demands a global standard, and that extends beyond the gates to the very street you arrive on. The report suggested that a holistic approach to redevelopment could elevate Memphis's overall standing as a heritage destination. This included not just physical improvements, but also developing narratives that connected Graceland to the broader musical and civil rights history of Memphis, making the visit a richer cultural experience. It also recommended better multilingual signage and information services to cater to an international audience. The idea was to leverage Graceland's power to enhance the entire city's image. But is it fair to expect a local community to live up to global standards set by places like the Louvre or the Colosseum? And if Memphis tries to brand itself too heavily around Graceland, does it overshadow other important aspects of its history and culture? And how do you ensure that cultural branding doesn't turn into cultural appropriation or misrepresentation of Whitehaven's true identity? Number 8, how do people get around Whitehaven? Transportation is fundamental to urban life, and Transit for Tourists and Locals, a mobility study, conducted in 2019 by the Memphis Area Transit Authority MATA and the American Planning Association APA Tennessee chapter, analyzed how people moved in and around Graceland. It looked at bus routes, pedestrian paths, bike infrastructure, and car traffic. The study revealed that public transit options to and from Graceland were adequate for many residents, but often confusing or inconvenient for tourists, especially those staying downtown. The bus routes existed, but they weren't always direct, and the wait times could be long. For residents, the study highlighted that bus stops often lacked basic amenities like shelters or benches, making waiting uncomfortable. For both groups, the first and last mile problem was significant. Getting from a bus stop to a specific destination or from Graceland to a local business often involved walking along unsafe or unpleasant routes. And Mr. Julian Price, a transportation planner, noted that mobility should be seamless, not a series of hurdles. The report proposed several solutions, creating a dedicated Graceland shuttle service from key tourist areas like downtown, improving and branding existing model routes, and crucially, investing in better pedestrian and cycling infrastructure along Elvis Presley Boulevard and connecting side streets. It also suggested integrating transit information more directly into tourist guides and Graceland's own visitor information. The goal was to make it easy for everyone to access and explore the area, reducing reliance on private cars and easing congestion. But if a dedicated shuttle is introduced, will that just further isolate Graceland from the public transit system used by residents? And are residents willing to see some street space dedicated to bike lanes if it means less room for cars or parking? And how do you convince people to use public transit when they are used to driving everywhere? Number 7, are we listening to the next generation? Urban planning often focuses on current residents and established stakeholders, but youth engagement in urban planning Whitehaven's next generation, a unique study from 2022 by the Boys and Girls Clubs of Memphis in collaboration with Rhodes College's Urban Studies program, made a point of listening to young people. It asked children and teenagers in Whitehaven what they wanted for their neighborhood. The study used creative methods like drawing workshops, photo voice projects where kids documented their surroundings, and youth-led focus groups. The findings were revealing. Young people expressed a strong desire for more safe public spaces, parks, community centers, and places to just hang out that weren't associated with gang activity. They wanted better schools, access to sports facilities, and opportunities for summer jobs. While Graceland was a distant presence, it wasn't a central part of their daily lives or aspirations for the neighborhood. Dr. Maya Gupta, who coordinated the project, emphasized that the future of Whitehaven belongs to its youth. Their voices are not just insightful, but essential. The report recommended creating a permanent youth advisory council for local planning decisions, developing more mentorship programs, and investing in after-school and summer programs that directly responded to what young people said they needed. It also suggested integrating public art projects into redevelopment designed and created by local youth to give them a sense of ownership and pride in their community. The study highlighted that focusing solely on adult concerns would miss a vital perspective on what makes a neighborhood truly livable for everyone. But can young people really understand the complex economic and political realities of urban planning? And if their ideas conflict with adult priorities, whose vision should take precedence? And what responsibility do we have to implement their ideas rather than just listen and then do what we planned anyway? Number 6, who gets access to the internet? In the 21st century, internet access isn't a luxury. It's a necessity for education, jobs, and connecting with the world. The Digital Divide and Urban Access Tech in Whitehaven, a 2023 study by the Memphis Public Library System and the Memphis Telecommunications Board, investigated broadband access and digital literacy in the Graceland area. This was about more than just fast internet. It was about equity. The research found a significant digital divide within Whitehaven. While some parts of the neighborhood had good, affordable broadband access, other areas, particularly low-income pockets, suffered from a lack of infrastructure or residents couldn't afford the service. Many households relied solely on cell phone data, which is often insufficient for online learning or remote work. The study also highlighted a lack of digital literacy skills among some older residents, making it harder for them to access online government services or even connect with family. Ms. Brenda Carter, head of the Library System's Community Outreach, stressed that in an increasingly digital world, a lack of access is a barrier to opportunity, pure and simple. The report recommended several interventions, expanding public Wi-Fi hotspots in parks and community centers, developing programs to provide low-cost or free internet service to eligible households, and offering free digital literacy training at local libraries and senior centers. It also suggested advocating for infrastructure upgrades by internet service providers in underserved areas. The goal was to ensure that all Whitehaven residents could fully participate in the digital economy and society, not just those who could afford it. But who bears the cost of expanding broadband infrastructure to every corner of Whitehaven? And if people get access to the internet, does that mean they'll be more vulnerable to online scams or misinformation? And how do you ensure that these digital inclusion efforts are sustained over time, not just one-off projects? Number 5, can Whitehaven feed itself? Access to healthy, affordable food is a basic need that often gets overlooked in urban planning. Food Deserts and Urban Gardens Community Food Systems, a 2018 study by the Memphis Food Policy Council in partnership with the Department of Health, focused on food access in the Whitehaven area. It mapped grocery stores, convenience stores, and fast food outlets and surveyed residents about their eating habits. The findings confirmed what many residents already knew Whitehaven was, in parts, a food desert. There were a disproportionate number of fast food restaurants and convenience stores selling highly processed foods, but a scarcity of full-service grocery stores offering fresh produce at reasonable prices. This meant many residents had to travel long distances, often without reliable transportation, to get healthy food. The study linked this lack of access to higher rates of diet-related diseases in the community. Dr. Sharon Hayes, a public health researcher, stated that a healthy community starts with healthy food, and that means making sure everyone has easy access to nutritious options. The report recommended several strategies incentivizing grocery store chains to open new locations in Whitehaven through tax breaks or land subsidies, supporting the development of community gardens and farmers markets, and establishing mobile food markets that could bring fresh produce directly to underserved areas. It also suggested educational programs on healthy eating and cooking. The goal was to create a more resilient and equitable food system within Whitehaven. But if grocery stores haven't moved into Whitehaven on their own, are incentives enough to make it economically viable for them? And are people willing to put in the work to maintain community gardens, or do they prefer the convenience of a supermarket? And how do you overcome ingrained dietary habits and cultural preferences to encourage healthier eating, even if access improves? Number 4, is there more to Whitehaven than Elvis? Graceland is a monument to music, but is there potential for a broader arts and culture scene in Whitehaven? Arts and culture district potential beyond music. A 2021 feasibility study by Arts Memphis and the Memphis College of Art explored the possibility of establishing a defined arts and culture district in the area. It looked at existing artists, venues, and cultural organizations. The study identified a latent but strong creative community within Whitehaven, local musicians, visual artists, poets, and performers who often operated under the radar. However, they lacked formal venues, funding, and public recognition. The report found that while Graceland drew millions, it didn't necessarily foster a diverse local art scene. In fact, it often overshadowed it. There was a desire among local artists for spaces to create, perform, and exhibit their work, and for opportunities to connect with the broader Memphis arts community. Ms. Jessica Owens, an arts consultant, highlighted that every community has a creative pulse. The challenge is to give it space and support to thrive. The study recommended designating specific areas within Whitehaven as art zones, offering incentives for artists to live and work there, and providing grants for the creation of new galleries, performance spaces, and public art installations. It also suggested creating a cultural festival unique to Whitehaven, showcasing local talent and complementing Graceland's offerings. The goal was to diversify the area's cultural offerings, creating a more dynamic and authentic experience for both residents and visitors. But if you create an arts district, will it just attract artists from other parts of the city and gentrify the area further? And how do you ensure that the art promoted truly reflects the diverse voices and experiences of Whitehaven, not just what's considered mainstream? And what if the local community prefers to keep its arts and culture more grassroots and informal without formal district designation? Number 3, who is really in charge of all this change? Redevelopment is complex, involving many different players. Governance and collaboration, public-private partnerships, a 2017 white paper by the Greater Memphis Regional Economic Development Council and the Policy Studies Institute at the University of Tennessee examined the various entities involved in Graceland area planning and how well they cooperated. It looked at the roles of city government, county government, Graceland holdings, community groups, and private developers. The study found that while there was a general desire for collaboration, the actual coordination was often fragmented. Different entities had different mandates, funding streams, and priorities, leading to silos and sometimes conflicting objectives. Graceland Holdings, as a major private entity, often pursued its own development initiatives, which sometimes felt disconnected from broader community planning goals. Local community groups, though passionate, often lacked the formal power or resources to significantly influence large-scale projects. Dr. Richard Stone, a political scientist, observed that effective urban development requires a unified vision, not a collection of independent agendas. The report recommended establishing a formal, high-level Whitehaven Redevelopment Task Force with representatives from all key stakeholders: city, county, Graceland, community leaders, and local businesses. This task force would be empowered to develop a comprehensive, integrated master plan and oversee its implementation, ensuring that individual projects align with broader community goals. It also emphasized the need for transparent communication and clear decision-making processes to build trust among all parties. But can such a diverse task force truly agree on a single vision, or will it just become a battleground for competing interests? And how do you give genuine power to community voices without bogging down the development process with endless debate? And what happens if Graceland Holdings simply decides not to participate or to go its own way? Number 2, can our pipes and wires handle all this? Any talk of new development, more visitors, and more residents eventually comes down to basic infrastructure: water, sewer, power. Infrastructure, strain water, sewer, and power upgrades. A 2019 engineering assessment by Memphis Light, Gas, and Water Mill GW and the City of Memphis Public Works Department was a stark look at the capacity of Whitehaven's utility systems. The study found that while the existing infrastructure was generally functional, significant new development, especially large-scale commercial or multifamily residential projects, would put a considerable strain on the aging systems. Many of the water mains and sewer lines were decades old, designed for a different era and population density. The electrical grid also showed vulnerabilities, particularly during peak demand periods or extreme weather events. The report specifically flagged the need for substantial upgrades to ensure reliable service for future growth. Chief Engineer Michael Davis warned that we can't build a new Whitehaven on old pipes and wires. Infrastructure needs to lead, not lag development. The report outlined a multi-year, multi-million-dollar plan for phased infrastructure upgrades, including replacing outdated water and sewer lines, enhancing electrical substations, and improving stormwater drainage systems. It also emphasized the importance of coordinating these utility projects with planned road improvements to minimize disruption and maximize efficiency. The financial implications were significant, highlighting that redevelopment is not just about buildings, but the unseen network that supports them. But who pays for these massive infrastructure upgrades? The city, the county, Graceland, or new developers? And if these projects cause extended road closures and utility disruptions, how will that impact residents and businesses in the short term? And what happens if the anticipated growth doesn't materialize, leaving the city with expensive, underutilized infrastructure? Number 1, what stories are we forgetting? Amidst all the planning and numbers, it's easy to forget the human element, the lived experience. Narratives of change, oral histories of Whitehaven residents. A powerful qualitative study from 2020 by the Memphis Oral History Project and the Benjamin L. Hooks Institute for Social Change at the University of Memphis aimed to capture just that. It collected and documented the personal stories of longtime Whitehaven residents. The study conducted dozens of in-depth interviews, recording residents' memories of Whitehaven before Graceland became a major attraction, their experiences during its rise, and their hopes and fears for the future. What emerged was a rich tapestry of community life, marked by resilience, strong social bonds, and a deep sense of place. Many residents spoke of a neighborhood that was once vibrant and self-sufficient, but felt increasingly overlooked or misunderstood by outsiders, including some planners. There was pride, but also a feeling of being on the periphery of Graceland's fame. Dr. Sharon Washington, the lead oral historian, noted that these stories are not just anecdotes, they are the heart of Whitehaven, offering invaluable context that data alone can't provide. The report emphasized that any redevelopment plan must honor these community narratives, not erase them. It recommended incorporating public art that reflected local history, creating community archives, and ensuring that residents' voices were not just heard at initial meetings, but were truly integrated into ongoing decision-making processes. The study served as a reminder that a neighborhood is more than just buildings and roads. It's a living, breathing collection of stories and memories. But if everyone's story is unique, how do you synthesize them into a single, coherent vision for the future? And what if some of these stories reveal deep-seated conflicts or resentments within the community that are hard to reconcile? And are we prepared to truly listen to and respect these narratives, even if they challenge our preconceived notions of progress and development?